It's a great pleasure to bring back OTS's first ever guest. Super Rare George is in the house. Welcome back to the show. How have you been?
I haven't been too bad, thank you. That's a cool way of putting it. The first ever guest on the podcast. Was I the first guest? I must have been the first guest.
You were episode 2. You were the first guest. We didn't have a guest on episode 1. You were the first guest.
Oh, privilege. That's quite a I need to put that on my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, you are on the shelf royalty.
Very true. But yeah, I'm very good, thank you. How's it going your side?
Doing good. This is a special treat because you brought somebody with you. Who did you bring?
I've bought the I guess the elder Perkins in the video games industry. I'm going to say as well the second most famous in the video games industry. I brought along Jason Perkins from Curve Digital.
Thanks for that great introduction, George. Guys, it's great to be on the show. I heard the first podcast. I thought it was very good. Proud of George and what he's doing with Super Rare Games. And good to hear him share it with you guys. And what fantastic voices you've got, particularly you, Sol.
Well, thank you.
I can only take this so much.
Sorry.
Well, Jason, Jason, welcome to the show. I got to say, it's great to have you here. We only have one question for you, and we hope it fills up the entire segment. It's not even really a question, just more of a request. If you could just tell us everything embarrassing about George ever.
We could make a whole podcast for that.
but in all seriousness, tell our listeners a bit about yourself.
So, I was doing the calculation earlier. So I've been making video games now for 37 years. I started effectively as a developer. I developed a game on the Commodore 64, which, if Atari's lawyers are listening, is in no way a rip-off of Centipede. And it was a game that I called Maggot Mania. And my mum, George's nan, took me out of school when we headed down, hot-footed it down to Commodore, and managed to sign a deal, publishing deal. It wasn't a very good deal that my mum did. I think it was only 5% royalties, but walked away with a check for 1,000 British pounds when I was 15. So I was just at that stage just loved being part of the video games business. It was obviously a lot tinier then, and continued on then developing games for Commodore 64, for the Amiga. I'm kind of accelerating things through actually. But then after about 10 years, I then joined Sony. A good friend of mine, a guy called Phil Harrison, he gave me a call and said he's just joined Sony and wanted me to be part of the launch team for PlayStation. And so that was a very exciting time, in addition to working as a sort of third-party account manager for publishers, developers interested in working on PlayStation. I also produced the very first PlayStation game to come from the European studio in London, which actually was a basketball game. Total NBA, I think it was called. So that was great. And then I worked there for a few years, just before we kind of started thinking about PlayStation 2, and then worked for a US publisher, big publisher called GT Interactive. For Europe at least, they've got the rights to Doom and Quake. So it was great to be part of launching those two massive games into Europe. I was doing a lot of that job. I was doing a lot of product acquisitions. I think that's where George gets it from. And basically hooking up with a lot of European, UK developers and signing up product for GT Interactive. And then I think it's probably around about 6 years that I've been kind of out of mainstream development and decided that I wanted to get back into development and set up a developer effectively that was Curve Studios, which was the developer. We did a lot of stuff for Sony. We worked on, I don't think it made it over to the US, but it was quiz series of games called Buzz. And I think the first few games came out on, I think it was PlayStation 3, might have been PlayStation 2, but it was a series of quiz games. And we worked on we did all the PlayStation, PSP, PlayStation Portable games for them. And then also, we managed to sign an original game with Nintendo as well for the Wii, a game called Fluidity, which is a physics-based water game where you can sort of move water around environments to solve puzzles, but also you can change the state of the water across the 3 states. So you've got sort of solid, so you can become a big ice cube to smash through walls. You can go into a gas, so you can sort of fly to sort of high parts of the level. But a lot of the action sort of takes place as water, as you need to preserve your body of water. So that was a brilliant experience working with Nintendo. They're definitely the best developer. Definitely, all the others are equally good to work with from a development perspective. They're just all about the game and getting the game right is key for them. And we continued as a developer. I think we got up to there was about 80 of us at one point. But then it was clear that it was becoming very challenging for developers to sign products. So this is sort of circa 2011, 2012. Also, not a lot of work for hire around at that particular time. And so we were kind of wondering what direction to take. And then a friend of mine who worked at Sony, a guy called Shahid Ahmed, he was challenged with the task of creating more content for PlayStation Vita. It was is a really great piece of hardware, but not a lot of content. And he wanted to kickstart content by working with smaller indie devs to bring their content across from PC and bring that across to Vita. And so he had some funding available. Curve had published a game called Stealth Bastards on PC, which had been really sort of popular for us, worked really well. We sold that on Steam. There was a free demo around as well. Shahid was interested in that. But where it got quite interesting for us was the fact that Curve had a lot of talented console developers, and some of our indie friends, so the likes of sort of Mike Bithell, Jasper, who did Lone Survivor, Jasper Byrne, they weren't particularly interested porting their games from PC to console formats. So we kind of stepped in and we kind of joined the 3 dots of great content. So we published Thomas Was Alone on all the console formats, linking that up with Sony for their support and their funding, and then Curve for the sort of development expertise. So very quickly we signed up 4 titles. We also had, it was Proteus, Stealth, Lone Survivor, and Thomas Was Alone. So those are our 4 launch titles. And what we didn't quite realize is that we'd have to publish them ourselves. So while we'd get support from Sony, we had to physically get the message out there, market these games, and release these games on the console formats we'd signed up for. So that's really where we started to develop a publishing business. That was really me and another friend of mine, a guy called Simon Byron, who's continues to be the sort of publishing director at sort of Curve Digital, signing loads of great content. And we basically just grew this publishing arm, and it's successful. We've now released 42 games.
Is that all?
Very, very yeah, 42 games across. I don't know how many SKUs that would be, because often they're multi-format as well. But the only thing, well, it's not a regret, I guess, but we've effectively Curve Digital now is just a publisher. So the developers that we worked with before, they now work at different studios. A bulk of them work at a porting house called Warp Digital. So we still work a lot with those guys. But now we're working probably with about 12 different developers now for releases through from this year into next year, which is really exciting. We've Human Fall Flat, as I say, continues to do really, really well. There was something I was going to mention there. I don't think it's been announced, so I probably shouldn't say just yet. But there's a couple of big sort of developers that we're looking to work with as well. We've got we worked with a group called Iron Oak, those guys would be really good to get on the show. Actually, but we'll be launching the console versions of For the King, due to sort of come out around about May time. So that should be good. But that's kind of a very quick sort of summary of my 37 years.
Oh, it's wonderful. We're very happy to have you on the show. Thank you for kind of going through that. We're actually going to touch on quite a bit of those topics as we kind of roll through here.
Great.
And trust me, there's going to be plenty of time to expand on all of that. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be interested in hearing a lot of what you've got to say there.
Thank you.
George, how would you describe the year that you've had? Did anything surprise you?
I mean, it's been a crazy year for Super Rare Games. Definitely, the last year. I think the thing that surprised me is the growth we've seen as a company. We started, literally almost a year to the date. In a year to have the fan base and to have the success and the releases we've had, I think is something that I really didn't expect to happen so quickly. I think out quicker than I envisioned them ever selling out. The amount of unique customers we're getting to the website, again, is something that I really didn't imagine. So I think, again, since I spoke to you last, it's been a real roller coaster. I think as well, to be able to release such diverse content from so many different talented studios all across the world, I think, it isn't something that I envisioned being the case. So it has been a really, really crazy year here, having now announced 14 games, with 12 of them having been sold out, close to selling out. So again, from a business perspective, our company's grown so much. I can't even begin to kind of try and explain that kind of feeling of seeing the business kind of grow that way. But it's an incredibly loyal group of fans we've got, and it's definitely changed a lot since we last spoke.
Yeah, 12 games in 12 months is an accomplishment. We were excited when you managed to get all 12 out the door.
Definitely, it was interesting. I was having a discussion with someone the other day, and I can't even remember who it was. But the idea was, I was saying to them, we only release one game a month, and that's something that's very important to Super Rare Games, which is keeping consumers, making sure that consumers can keep up with our releases. And when I said that we publish one game a month, they were like, "That's a lot of games to publish," which is true. There is so much that goes into each release. So releasing 12 games in the space of 12 months as a company that started 12 months ago is definitely very impressive. And then to have each game performing well as well is really, really good. So I'm beyond happy about kind of how it's gone and stuff.
We won't discuss much of it, but the secondary market is going crazy with your games.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I think. I mean, the best example of that is obviously Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time, which the secondary market for that is nuts. And I think what's interesting is, so it's kind of interesting when you look at the quantities that we built for. We started with 5,000 copies of the first two games, and whilst that number seems very low, it's actually a lot of games to sell in a physical format from a company which had zero presence before we launched them. So they did take a while to sell out, but when we released our third and fourth releases, we went for 3,000 units, and the idea of that was we were sitting on a lot of stock. So we thought 3,000 was a good way. We thought it kind of encapsulated the demand for the product quite well. But the problem is as the company grew and grew and grew, 3,000 is now not very much for one of our releases, and there's a lot of people that want a Super Rare game. So I think what's happened here is Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time is an amazing game with a massive audience. Yeah, people are now finding out about us now, and they're like, "Oh no, I want Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time," and the problem is it's now sold out. And it's interesting because obviously there's kind of the whole world, the whole idea of a scalper, which is someone that's obviously buying up loads of games to then sell them. But I think with our games, especially the older ones, it's not really a case of scalpers. It's definitely a case of everyone that was buying the games was buying it to play and store it. But I think people have now realised that actually they've got something on their shelf which is worth hundreds and hundreds of pounds.
No longer worrying about getting a pension. I'm just going to get a couple of copies of Lovers from George. I'll sell those in 10 years' time.
Yeah, Lovers in Dangerous Space-Time and Shelter Generations have both skyrocketed in value, but Lovers is definitely, I've seen it go anywhere between $200 and $400 US dollars. It's crazy to think that so quickly your a release from you has gone up that value. You expect it in the long term, but Lovers, those games aren't even 8 months old, 9 months old now.
It is insane. I'll be interested to see what it's like in a couple of years' time. It is crazy. So I'm sure if anything goes wrong, as always, as Jay says, there's the pension funds will be Super A games.
Well, speaking of Jason, you must be rather proud of what George has been able to accomplish this year. Has he always had this kind of drive, and does he remind you of maybe a younger you in a certain way?
I am, incredibly proud of what he's managed to achieve in such a short time. And he's always had super enthusiasm for something. So he really kind of jumps in with both feet. I can recall when he first started collecting Yu-Gi-Oh cards, instantly he wanted to buy every card in the world and build up his collection and go to clubs and play lots of Yu-Gi-Oh. And he jumps into everything with 110%. So, and then just really willing just to try stuff, give it a go. Why not? That sort of attitude, which is a great attitude, I think, to have. He's managed to set this business up, and his friends, most of his friends have gone off to university, and they'll be returning with debt, unfortunately, through all their college fees, etc., and university fees. And George has actually set up a business, learnt the trade, knows a lot of people now. He's off to a good start. So very proud. As long as he doesn't overshadow me, then that's fine. Did you describe me as the second most famous Perkins in the video games industry? So it's already started to happen. But it was great last year. Actually, it was George's GDC San Francisco is a show that I've been going to for 20 plus years now. It's the one I always go to. Great to hook up. San Francisco's a great city as well. And it was good to have George came along for his first one sort of last year. And it was good to see him knock around the place, although he seemed to just have the same sweatshirt on all the time. I didn't tell his mother. And it was good to introduce him to my boss, Dominic Wheatley, who's been around. If he was on the podcast now, he'd be telling you how he invented Tomb Raider and Championship Manager. And also mentioned earlier, actually, a really good family friend, Phil Harrison. And just to sort of hook up with them, we actually we got chatting to Phil, and he just told us he's now at Google and was just telling us a little bit about what those guys are up to, which all sounds very exciting, but a million miles away from what George is doing, and to a certain extent what I'm doing as well. But it's all good, all very good.
Speaking of your earlier days, your industry career stretches back to early to mid 80s. Can you imagine how different the video game industry was back in the Commodore 64 and Spectrum days? What was it like for you back then, and how did you really get started in the field? You said you developed a Commodore game. That was your first jump into it.
That's right. Yeah, Maggot Mania, nothing to do with Centipede. 1982, I think that was published by Commodore. The challenge back then really was it was really difficult to find like-minded video games developers. You didn't have the internet to be able to sort of communicate. So the way you communicated with like-minded people was through magazines, reading the letters pages of magazines, and then going along to, as they used to call them, computer fairs, computer shows. And so the first few that I went along very much as a punter, looking to buy games, because they would the developers at the time would have little booths, tables set up selling audio cassettes. And that was the way you then sort of try and bump into and sort of start talking to people. As I then started to develop my own games, it was probably through journalistic kind of contacts that you kind of got a feeling for what other people were doing, what else was kind of going on. But definitely those first few years, it was really difficult to find where the community was and who was making games. It was obviously, relatively speaking to now, just a really tiny business. Generally kind of reserved very much for the world of geeks. Computer games, video games weren't mainstream at all by any stretch. I guess probably things like Atari VCS coming in got it a little bit into the home, but it was still quite an expensive pastime at that particular point. So it was difficult. It was very Wild West as well. Publishers, signing up with publishers who then disappeared very quickly. trying to get your money out of distributors and other bits and pieces. It was very difficult times, I think, and very exciting though. It did feel like you were sort of starting a completely kind of new business. That bit was very exciting, but yeah, difficult to find where the community is.
I got to tell you, the 64 was my first computer. It wasn't my first console, but it was definitely my first computer. I remember it very fondly.
It's a really nice piece of kit. It was really easy to program. 64K memory was an awful lot, and some really good games.
I still have my Commodore 64 actually, with the monitor and everything. My dad's not big into games at all, but he actually programmed a game on the Commodore 64. So you would think he'd be more about video games now, but he really isn't. He went off and did mechanical engineering instead.
Yeah, for many years, my mum would ask me when I was going to get a proper job. I don't think it was ever considered to be a proper job at that particular time. There's quite a few people I know who do definitely went on to do more proper jobs than video games. But yeah, unfortunately, I moved to quite a small flat. I ended up throwing away so much of my, I guess, memorabilia. I had I'm probably known for two popular games on the Commodore 64, a game called Thing on a Spring and another one called Monty on the Run. They were sort of two of the popular games, sort of 85, I think. And I had the Commodore 64 that I wrote Thing on a Spring on, because quite literally you'd write it on the hardware that you're developing for. And because there wasn't enough loft space, ended up just binning it along with many other things as well. So that's a little bit disappointing. Seeing what George is doing kind of on the collector's side of things does make me think that I should have hung on to a few more things than I did. I've almost completed the hunt now, buying back all the games that I ever worked on, that I ever sort of developed myself. There's about 30 of them. And so using the wonderful eBay tool, I've almost gotten back. There's one game which I haven't got hold of yet.
Which one?
It was a licensed game that was developed for Gremlin Graphics, and it was based on a cartoon series called Mask. And it was kind of a bit sort of transformery from what I can remember, sort of about cars basically, with kind of weapons and bits and pieces. So it wasn't a particularly good game, but that's the only one I think I've got to find.
Well, I very much remember Mask. Mask was kind of like a combination of Transformers and G.I. Joe.
Yes. That's exactly it. So I've got obviously a search running on eBay. And if any of your listeners have got a copy that they're willing to part with, then that would complete my collection. But yes, so I've been doing that. I had quite a nice moment with, I did have a copy of Thing on a Spring, but it wasn't a particularly good copy. And I found one on eBay, and I think it was about 15 British pounds, so it was at $20, and bought that from the guy, and then he messaged me and said, "Are you the Jason Perkins who wrote the game?" And I replied, "Well spotted," because it's not actually on the manual or anything. You've had to have played the game. And so I just pinged it back and said, "Yeah, well spotted. I'm just in the process of trying to buy back some of the games that I haven't got copies of." And he said, "I really love playing the game in the 80s. I'm going to refund you all the money. It's an honor to reunite you with your game." So that was brilliant. So I appreciate what he did there. And then I gave him a Curve Digital Friends and Family code, which enabled him to download all our Steam games for free.
Well, that's just a wonderful thing. What a great story, though, to have that ability to reconnect with that type of thing in that way, because it's been a few years since you made that.
Yes, yeah. many years. Yeah. Just to say, actually, I've got sitting ready to wire up to the television is the Mini 64, which has got two of my games. I think it's got Monty and Thing on a Spring on. So I've been meaning to fire that up and see how far the boys get on playing those. It being a very difficult game.
We could spend a whole hour talking about how difficult games were back then compared to how they are now.
Sure. You didn't. Yeah, there was no real kind of QA quality assurance. It was literally as soon as the game was finished, and for me, finish was I was able to play it through from start to finish. That master cassette would be whisked off to a cassette duplication company, and bang, off it went.
Yeah, what a different time.
Yeah, oh yeah. There was, I think it was only when the last game I developed was for the Amiga, a game called Rough and Tumble, and that was the first time that I'd ever had any QA and was getting sort of bug reports kind of coming through, and that was it. So what was that? It's 94-ish. So yeah, it took a while before we got proper QA in place.
You said 94, and that's 94 was kind of a key year for you, right?
So that was yeah, absolutely. That was when I left GT and joined Sony to sort of be part of the sort of launch team, and it kind of triggered, I guess, me hanging up my keyboard and stopping actually developing games myself. People around that time who decided to do kind of a similar and move more into sort of production roles rather than sort of frontline development. Then it was kind of there was a move from machine code, as we called it, from sort of assembly language programming. As devices were getting far more powerful, it became more sustainable to develop in C++, C. And so, yeah, you didn't necessarily need the skill sets of the likes of me who were writing low-level sort of machine code.
What else can you tell us about those days with Sony? Because that must have been kind of an amazing experience, right? To be there during that launch.
Well, I think I was employee sort of 12, 13 for Sony in Europe. And we obviously got to see early sort of prototype hardware, which actually the device looked like an exploded photocopier. It was about the size of a big desk sort of photocopier or a sort of large laser printer. But they hadn't sort of looked to sort of finesse the development kit. So there was wires and boards coming out of everywhere. So it didn't look particularly great. But once we saw some of the development work which was coming through from sort of Japan, so primarily Ridge Racer, Toshinden, which was then overshadowed by Tekken. But these were like proper 3D games. It really matched that sort of tagline of having the arcade in your home. It was just amazing. I think it's the biggest leap technology-wise, really, that we've sort of ever seen. And just seeing how people were able to use 3D to sort of create games, whereas previously it was just obviously there had been some 3D games, but the hardware just wasn't really up to it. The challenges we had was most of the developers, at least in the UK, used to working in development environments where the cost of getting hold of the kit would be £400 or £500, and the price for a single Sony PlayStation 1 development kit was £10,000. So immediately, unfortunately, that kind of excluded some teams kind of getting onto the hardware because the cost of getting onto the hardware was just so expensive, which was a bit of a shame, really, which is why initially you just obviously didn't see any indie titles as such. It was all coming from sort of the big studios, and that was a challenge. But as things started to move forward and the exploded photocopier then reduced down to sort of final size hardware, and we got to see the first piece of kit up and running, that was mind blowing. That was amazing. I remember I had before it had even been released. I had one that I used to take round to show developers and publishers, and also to show a few friends as well. And I think everyone was amazed. We'd sort of return back one evening from the pub, and particularly Ridge Racer, that was the really kind of popular one that we used to play. And it was amazing. Really, really good.
I don't really have this on my list of questions, but I kind of, as we're talking about it, made me think of this. Do you have any thoughts or comments on the situation between Nintendo and Sony during that early development of the PlayStation? It's fairly well known that the PlayStation was born out of the relationship and the cross development between the two companies, and Sony had provided the sound chips on the SNES, but there was obviously a bit of a fracture between the two of them, which in a way sort of launched the PlayStation into what we all know. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I'd sort of heard the sort of story that Sony got quite close with Nintendo, as you say, supplying the sort of chips as well. But they'd also entered a joint partnership to develop disc-based. I'm not sure if it was going to be a plug-in for the SNES or whether it was going to be a new piece of hardware. So the rumors was that there was apparently agreement in place that Nintendo couldn't release a disc-based machine without Sony. And obviously something happened there. I don't know the ins and outs of it. But consequently, that is why the N64 still came out as a cartridge-based machine, which was hugely expensive from a cost of goods perspective. So I don't know whether that was Sony trying to be smart or whether it was just a relationship that sort of didn't go as intended. But consequently, that opened Sony's eyes to the world of video gaming, as they were obviously kind of aware of how well Nintendo were doing with SNES on that sort of particular point. It's interesting though, at the time, Sony Corporation wanted to keep arm's length away from PlayStation. They weren't completely convinced it was going to be a success. And the way that manifested itself was that Sony Corporation only gave them a license for 12 months to use the name Sony on the actual unit and on the packaging. After that 12 months, they would have to renew it, which I think then gave Sony Corporation a chance just to sort of pull away from this toy that was being made. Obviously, they didn't. It was a huge success and probably now one of the biggest, it must be the biggest revenue generators within Sony Corp now, I'd guess, compared to the electronic side of things. So yeah, it was good that they held in there for their 12 months before selling off the business back to Nintendo, maybe.
George, I understand that you were a legit game tester as a kid, and there are child labor laws, you know. What's it like growing up immersed in that kind of world?
Because, yeah, you know, every kind of, a lot of time in summer and in kind of school holidays, I would go into, where Dad was working and stuff, and I would kind of see that culture, and it's really interesting kind of growing up in that kind of environment. There are still people in the video games industry that remember me not as George Perkins, but as Peter Pan, the Disney character, because I used to go into the office and fly around pretending to be Peter Pan when I was, 5 or something. It's really cool being immersed in that culture, and I think, I definitely, when I was a bit older, I'd kind of, have a very informal kind of testing role there and just play games and stuff. And I think in hindsight, it was definitely not a job. It was definitely just playing games. But I think as I got older and older and older, it kind of became, I might, try and break the game a little bit and do more of a tester role. But yeah, I guess being immersed in that culture from a very young age was definitely really, really amazing. And getting to kind of, I think it's difficult because obviously growing up, it just kind of, it was my dad's job, but kind of now seeing it, the impact it's had on people and stuff. And it's, it's definitely interesting now to be older and kind of looking back at that time very fondly. Yeah, it definitely was a very invaluable experience.
As George mentioned, we were working, I think it was for PlayStation 2. We'd signed a deal with Disney and we were developing a Peter Pan game based on the time yet to be released sequel, Peter Pan Return to Neverland, which coincided in George's passion of the material of Peter Pan. I think like all kids do, is when they get a favourite film, they just watch it and become it and absorb it. So it was very commonplace to see the green little boy flying around the office. but consequently, as part of the sort of process, it's great to get a fresh pair of eyes on any game. So we'd hand George the joypad and see how he got on. And so it would sort of at certain points kind of illuminate maybe where things were a bit too tricky, or maybe it hadn't been sort of signposted strongly enough on that side of things.
Free market research.
Did you got credit in Peter Pan?
I think I've got a couple credits. In a couple games, so that still can go on my on my CV. So we're all good.
I think the first, so often when I was probably GameCube era, so Mario Kart, and I'd have to get up early in the morning and I'd sit George sort of next to me for about 18 months or so, I guess, if I've got my maths right, but maybe 2 years. And I would give him a decoy controller that wasn't plugged in, so I could continue on playing Mario Kart, and he thought he was playing Mario Kart. But there was an early point where he did plug in the controller I plugged in the controller and he managed to get round the circuit, which was a proud moment for a video games dad. But I don't think it was until Ratchet and Clank, was where George's video games prowess started to sort of come through, and it was the real time when we were sort of sharing, passing the controller. Can you get past this bit? I can't do it, and sort of swapping it backwards and forwards. But it was one of the very first games as well, which we used to play online, Ethernet adapter for PlayStation 2, and so George was playing online, must have been about 7. I think there was a lot of other parents that sort of frowned upon that. I think particularly when I sort of was telling them of how well he was doing.
That was like 4th best in the world at some point.
Yeah. So you'd have different. So I think there was one where it was like number 1 at killing people with a wrench.
He still holds that title, just in a different way, right?
So I think it was a good grounding. I'd say there might be a few people who might frown upon online play at such a young age, but yeah, it was all good.
I'm curious, how did the decision come to pass that Human Fall Flat would be the first release for Super Rare Games? And since this was a title digitally published by Curve, I wanted to know if there was intense negotiations going on between you two. Was it arm wrestling?
It's an interesting one because obviously Super Rare's first 2 games were both Curve games, and going forwards again, there will definitely be more Super Rare games that are Curve releases. I think me and Jace are always mindful about the relationship we have when it comes to business. Working in the same industry as your son can always be a challenging aspect, and I always make sure I call him Jace when I talk about business, and Dad when it's not. But interestingly, that negotiation process was definitely handled not from either side, for either party, because we were very mindful of, we didn't want to kind of let anyone get involved in the process, because each company is an individual, and Curve is a very, very big company with lots of people involved, and similar with Super Rare. So that negotiation process was handled by the publishing director, Simon Byron at Curve, and then also from a Super Rare perspective, it was handled by 2 people, a guy called Stu and a guy called James Dillon. So that was kind of handled by that. So I think we always try and manage the whole Perkins thing very professionally. So whilst it's we'll have discussions about it, of course, but generally we like to keep it professional, make sure that there's no Perkins influence, because I think Curve's now owned by a big company called Catalyst. And there can't be seen to be favoritism, because again, Curve have other physical publishers they work with as well. They've also done a lot of work with Limited Run, and they've done a lot of work with, or they did release Velocity 2X with Strictly Limited as well. So I think it's always, it'd be seen as wrong as if it was a case of, let's give it to George again, which I think isn't the mindset that we want it to be held with the whole Curve Super Rare relationship. Obviously, it's a very strong relationship, but again, it has to, business has to come first.
As Curve, we've done an awful lot of work actually sort of during the early years of Limited Run, working with Doug and Josh on that, which was great. Really kind of suited both parties there. It gave Limited Run quite a lot of indie content, strong indie content, and it gave us some additional revenue. So that bit worked okay. But we kind of we saw the success of Limited Run and saw the working with many partners, and so we kind of realised there that we needed to sort of look to work with other partners as well. And at that time, we didn't know that Limited Run were actually going to get involved with Switch titles. We'd always worked with them on PS4 and Vita. So it was a bit of a no-brainer. But as George said, I let Simon sort of deal with that, which is quite interesting in terms of when I'll get an email from Simon and he'll say, I've had an email from your son in capitals about a new project or something. So it works. It's kind of arm's length. And we talk about the Chinese walls that we kind of have at home on sort of stuff that we're working on, which we need to have anyway. So for me, it's always just about trying to get hold of another copy of Lovers. That's all I'm after.
Jason's hidden eBay accounts, which are actually the ones that are selling Lovers names based on. The secondary value is only caused by Jason.
You're driving up the whole market, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Buying them so that people think they can.
The Stealth series is particularly neat. Stealth Inc. 2 was even released on the Wii U, Is there any chance that we're going to see a compilation released on the Switch?
That's a really good question. The short answer is probably unfortunately not. So, as I was sort of saying earlier, when originally Curve Digital, the publishing side, came out of a developer, Curve Studios, and that really was a company that was formed by me, our tech director, a guy called Richie, and Jonathan Biddle, or Bids, as he's known, who's the sort of designer that we work with at Curve, and consequently, really the father of the Stealth series of games. So it was really Bids was behind the Stealth series. So the original one on PC with the Naughty Word. Then we moved that across to console as Stealth Inc. And then, as you say, the sequel. The sequel we actually launched first on Wii U. We mentioned earlier we developed a game for Nintendo. So I had a really great relationship there. They liked the original, and I guess in the same way as Sony were looking for Vita content, I think the Wii U, as we all know, didn't get off to a great start and needed some content, and so we worked with them to bring Stealth Inc. first to Wii U. But unfortunately, with Wii U, it just didn't sort of take off really as a platform. So what happened with Stealth Inc. 2 was, I'd say, it came out on Wii U first, and then we had, I think it was a 6-month exclusivity window before we launched it on other platforms. And by that stage, it was kind of really difficult to get press to sort of talk about it. It was kind of old hat, really. And so when we launched it on the other formats, again, it didn't have a great sort of sales, the sales that we would have sort of hoped for. So not that it was connected with the great sales, but or lack of great sales, but Bids, who's the design director at that particular point, he decided to leave the company. So it was all very amicable, and we could see a route forward where Curve wasn't necessarily going to be developing its own original content, and so Curve and a few of the others, sort of designers and stuff, sort of parted ways at that particular point. Bids then left to set up his own studio called One Bit Beyond, and recently released Swords of Ditto for Devolver, and he's been working on that since we sort of parted ways. So in terms of 2 as a double pack on Switch, that'd make sense. If only we could get a collector's edition together. If only we knew someone.
The other thought I had was perhaps maybe discussion about a third entry in the series. The Stealth series you could certainly revive the old ones if you paired it with a new one.
Yeah, I'll add that to the agenda for the Monday morning agenda. See where we can go with it. It would be good to work with Bids on that. I know he's sort of pretty busy on a couple of other, but yes, leave that one with us. And
we'd love to see it.
We'll give you a credit.
Hey, we'd love to see it. I got to tell you, I enjoyed the Stealth series. I have both of them on my PC. A lot of fun. A friend of mine turned me on to that, years ago now, and just really enjoyed it. I thought, man, it'd be cool to have them together on a cartridge, but oh well.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, it'd be great. I got to tell you, it'd be great. So that's my plea. Work on that. George, do what you can. Come on.
I'll see what I can do.
Not to put you guys on the spot, although that's totally what I'm gonna do. George, if you could grab any of the games that Curve has published and put it on the street right now, what would it be?
Curve have a very diverse portfolio of very interesting games. They've got a game called When Ski Lifts Go Wrong. They just released. It looks really interesting. That's definitely a contender. They had a game called Smokin Sacrifice that I think kind of went under the radar a lot for people, but it's just kind of really interesting. Similar to Don't Starve experience, where you play as this lady who basically sacrifices her child, and it all goes a bit wrong. Basically, that's a really interesting game. I think that would be cool as a physical release, but not sure what will happen with that. Talk Simon, absolutely Simon. I mean,
this is a huge 40-hour epic. Small little dev who just kept on making the game. It's like, stop. It's too big now. And they just kept on going. It's beautiful hand-drawn artwork. Tank was he was the creative director on Nintendo's Battalion Wars. So he did. So he's got a bit of history there with Nintendo on that side of things. So that's a good pick there.
I think definitely. I mean, Curve's interesting because everything they release is a good game. So they're definitely one of the top indie publishers out there.
And you're not just saying that.
Exactly. I'm not just saying that. There's not many up there.
I've got there's Motorsports Manager. That'll be out about a month's time. Those Formula One fans can start the Formula One season. Very, very. Yeah, if you like your management sims, then that'll be right up your street on that side. And then for the King, and I'm trying to think if we announced. I'm not sure, but there's a game called American Fugitive as well, which is a kind of modern take on an original GTA type game. That looks great. I think we haven't announced that yet, so that may could be exclusive. When does the podcast go out?
Well, we're airing this. People are listening right now on March 3rd, the second anniversary of the Switch. So
brilliant. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure. I'll make sure we would have announced it by then.
So, George, just over a year ago, you mentioned the Super Rare Club as an idea here on this very show, and it's finally come to fruition. How many members have signed up so far, and what do you think about it?
Almost 700 members, which is really, really good. It's an amazing community. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because there was quite a lot of backlash when we first announced it. It was, again, it's difficult because I think with Super Rare Games, I'm so connected with it. Like, I have two phones. My work phone, one's my kind of, I guess my not work phone. And I spend a lot of time on the work phone. So I kind of, I reply to people on that before I do to my girlfriend, for example. Been listening, so shout out to Katie. But yeah, so I think it was difficult to start, but I think the ethos of the club was always to try and bring the most passionate people about Super Rare Games together, and then to offer them kind of perks of being a member. And I think it's definitely everyone that I know that is a member is very happy with that service and they're really enjoying it. And I think the most important thing, which was how does it affect me if I'm not a member? And I think people were scared that the games would sell out before they even get a chance to buy it if they weren't a member. However, in reality, it's not like that at all. I think it's been a really, really cool experience, and it's always nice to talk to these people directly as well, who are the club members. We've got a Discord server there, which is really good. And even just by email, people email me a lot and people tweet at me and things. I'm really, really happy about the reception, and I think it's something that's unique. There's not really something, especially in this kind of limited print sphere, that's like that. And I think, I think everyone that's part of it's really happy about it. Part of it is also happy with it because it's not affecting them in a direct way, which I think is always good. So yeah, it's been an amazing experience, kind of interacting with all the kind of super hardcore, super rare fans in a nice community.
What's the benefit of being a club member?
What is the benefit of being a club member?
Can I be a club member?
You can be. I can let you. You basically effectively get to shipping and priority access to products, so you can not have to be stressed out. There's quite a lot of people in Australia. When games go live, normally it's 6 p.m. GMT, which is about 1 p.m. East Coast. And people in Australia are like 3 a.m. or something. So for them, it's a case of actually they have plenty of time to make sure they don't miss out on a game. And I think as our games are selling out quicker and quicker, because when they see lovers on eBay for 400 quid, miss out on a game. So this gives them that kind of relief as well. They also get premium packaging as well, so they get kind of a cool packaging with bubble wrap and stuff. And that alone, we charge usually I think £2 for. And if you were to get 12 shipments, you effectively in the club. So you kind of make your money back by buying every game anyway. For the price it is, which is £25, you effectively over the course of the year you're gonna you're spending £1 or £2 per. You kind of make that money back anyway. So yeah, it's a cool thing, and I think
no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer, but I think it'll be opening up again kind of later on this year, just for people to have another chance to join up, and yeah, it'll definitely be something that people can join again if they want to.
There's all kinds of great indie games that are out there just waiting for a physical version. Are there any hints about what's coming down the pipeline there, George?
I think one of the biggest things where when I look at the portfolio of Super Rare Games is about being diverse and releasing something for everyone. So there are a few genres we haven't explored already, but I think I really want to explore this year, and we will be exploring this year. There are genres like JRPGs, which we haven't released before, which we will be releasing, which is exciting. We've got games that haven't been announced yet. We've got games that haven't come out digitally yet. We've got games that have been out digitally for ages. Puzzle games coming out, because that's, again, something we haven't explored before. And then point and click is probably one of my favorite genres of games that we haven't released any point and clicks, but we've got a couple coming up this year as well. So I think 2019, when I think about the portfolio, it's about releasing, different types of games that people don't know that they're going to love, but they will love it. Love it. No, I'm joking, but it's there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming up from Super Rare this year. Can't go into specifics, but definitely from two genres, definitely JRPG and point and clicks that we'll be exploring.
It's good to hear.
You haven't done a kart racer either. Just keep that in mind.
We haven't. That's a good point. Yeah, kart racing. That's a good point. I need to go back to drawing boards on that one. there might be a racing game coming, but we'll have to see how that goes.
You guys have any games that you like to play together? If so, what is it and who's better?
Always me, best.
Always you. What games do we play? We play quite a lot of...
We played Tricky Towers, what we?
Tricky Towers we're playing a lot of.
That was good fun.
Twitch. That's a really, really fun game, kind of Tetris style, and basically very topical with Tetris 99, which I've been playing a lot of. Do you know about Tetris 99?
Oh, yeah. We watched the direct together, didn't we?
Of course we did.
Love that, by the way.
It's really, so addicting.
It's free to download.
It's free to download
right.
if you've got the online.
Right.
Which embarrassingly, I didn't have the online, so I had to get it just for this.
Got the online.
I could have used it.
Yeah.
Damn. But
wasted money.
I think we played quite a lot of party games together. I think
we played Mario Party a lot, didn't we? When it came out, that was good fun.
So Mario Karts. I remember this is a good memory. I remember I was out somewhere and I was going home, and a couple of my mates were meeting me at my house, but I was running late, so they kind of arrived beforehand, and a drunk Jason Perkins kind of took them in, and when I came home, they were playing Mario Kart together in the living room, which is very nice. So a lot of Mario Kart.
I thought actually you were going to tell the Devolver story.
Devolver story
for when we were playing. What's it called?
This is another good story as well. So one time when I had a girl come around, it was the first time she'd been around. The initiation was there's a game called Genital Jousting, which is a Devolver game, and you effectively
know that game.
You know that game. I don't want to describe it too much because I don't know. Yeah, I guess
naughty. It's a very
naughty
naughty
game, but you effectively it's very phallic, and the mission was to play this game with the family, and
we had the projector, I think, set up. We had the projector playing 8 player, I think.
8 player Genital Jousting. So Genital Jousting is a great game.
Yeah, later in the show, for this episode, we're going to have the folks from Special Reserve Games on, who are obviously connected to Devolver. Yeah. So, maybe I'll mention a little bit about that particular game.
I don't see Genital Jousting getting ported to the Switch.
You don't think that'll make it to the Switch?
No, I don't think so.
I want that on cartridge. Come on.
Yeah, if Special Reserve don't release it, we'll release it. It's a Super Rare will step in.
Yeah, if you thought that explaining Galgun to your family was hard, wait till you explain Genital Jousting.
Exactly. We have a few questions for both of you as we're celebrating both the first anniversary of our podcast and the second anniversary of the Switch, and we're kind of asking all of our guests that are coming onto the show these types of questions. So the first one. What has been the biggest surprise to each of you about the Switch so far?
I think for me, it's the way it brought the community together. Like, definitely, I guess from my perspective, seemed a bit fragmented, but it definitely has joined everyone together. And people, again, maybe this is saying more about me and the way that I perceive stuff, but I seem much more connected with the platform and also people playing the platform as well. The last 2 years, I think I've been more rejuvenated in terms of playing games and enjoying games. I've obviously always enjoyed playing games, but I think as well gone in phases of playing a lot of AAA games and kind of ignoring indies, and now it's completely the opposite. I literally just play indie games. That's all I do, and I think that's what the Nintendo Switch has done for me. It's kind of rejuvenated how I felt about things, and I guess that's quite a personal response to it. But I think it's definitely I feel more connected to the community since the launch of the Switch.
As you mentioned earlier, with Curve, we published. In fact, we on Wii U. We got very close to the guys at Nintendo, and they told us about Switch really early on. I think they wanted us to be part of it. I think that was almost as a thank you for supporting Wii U, which hadn't sort of done so well. So we knew it was coming, but Nintendo being Nintendo, very secretive, and they never fully disclosed everything about the console. All they said was you will be able to play it on the go, and I think the piece of technology they didn't want to sort of share were effectively the Joy-Con and how they worked and clicked on and off, and you could dock the device, and they kept that a little bit secret on that side of things. So initially, happy. I was just really happy that it became a success, because I was worried that, and I know, speaking to my Nintendo friends, that I think if this hadn't sort of taken off as well as it had done, I think that there could have been some interesting strategy changes at Nintendo in terms of whether they remained in the hardware market or just became a software developer like Sega, sort of 10, 12, 15 years sort of previous. So I'm really chuffed that the console's been such a success and Nintendo continue in the hardware field. So I think that's made me happy. I think one of the good things about it is the fact that it is a games machine. Currently with Xbox and PlayStation, you're watching Netflix on there. I don't think there's Netflix apps or just yet.
Not, yeah. YouTube, there's not Netflix.
So it's just good that it's not used as a media device. It's used as a sort of proper gaming device. If Simon Byron, our publishing director, was on this, he'd be telling you how he now takes a slower train into the office, so he can get more Switch hours in. He's quite happy now to sit on a slower train, get a seat, and play longer on his Switch. So he's really enjoying it. So it's been a fantastic success of video games. So really happy for Nintendo. What I'd be interested to see is I think a new Switch. I think that would be good.
You're jumping ahead on us a little bit here. We have a question kind of about that. Hang on,
sure.
Hang on to that one.
But it's been a great platform. I think the only thing else, so we were quite early in on Switch with a few releases, wasn't as early as some. Our friends at Sumo Digital were there pretty much day one with Snake Pass, which sold phenomenally on Switch. We were a little bit later to the party, sort of towards the end of the first year, Full Flat, which has done fantastically. In fact, it's the number one digital download in Japan. So beating the likes of Splatoon, etc., as a digital download. So that was good. That will keep us sweet with Nintendo on that side of things. And then we came up with Flame of the Flood as well. So we had sort of two good launches. As with my sort of Curve Digital publisher hat on, it is getting far more challenging though on the platform, just because of the amount of releases each week. With those two releases I just talked about, we were probably one of 5 or 6 releases maybe that week. And now we're seeing 40, 50. I think one week there was 60 releases on the e-store, which just makes it really difficult for anyone to sort of cut through all the noise on that side of things. So it's making it a little bit more difficult. And it's an awful lot of content for players to decide what they do and don't want.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword.
It is. For us as a publisher, it means we need to work harder. It's our job anyway to make sure that the players are aware of our releases, that they're coming, and that it's the right title for them. But long gone are the days where you kind of got a release and you'll sit right at the top of the new releases for a few weeks. That's kind of gone now. You get pushed down by more current releases. So it is. Yeah, no, it definitely is a double-edged sword. I think there was obviously there was a gold rush from developers. To be honest, I don't know what you guys think, but there's an awful lot of poor mobile ports which have sort of come across, which hardly sort of push the Switch, both from a tech perspective and a content perspective. So yes, yeah, no, so it's a little bit challenging with sort of publisher hat on. How do you find it, Drew?
Digital publishing and physical publishing, I guess, I see as very different kind of entities, but definitely from a consumer perspective, it's very difficult to manage what's coming out. And I think from a rare perspective, I have to be kind of aware of all the new digital releases, and it is hard to do that. Very hard to do that.
What game or games are you both looking forward to seeing on the Switch or wish would come to the Switch?
I mean, I'm very excited for the Pokemon RPG, which would be interesting. It's interesting. I think the Nintendo Direct that just happened, me and Jace watched together, and there was nothing particularly in the Zelda Link's Awakening looks amazing. That'll be really cool.
I can answer that really easily. In terms of what I'm looking forward to coming is will be Pikmin.
Oh yeah,
Pikmin is a game that I've always loved from the very first game on the GameCube. I thought it was brilliant. And so they haven't announced it yet. And every time I actually meet with Nintendo in a very formal business meeting, it was always my final question. When's Pikmin coming to Switch then? And like very honourable Japanese men, they never tell me. But I would assume that's coming.
Yeah,
it must be coming. So I reckon maybe next Nintendo Direct, perhaps either a GDC or an E3 announcement. But that's the one that I'm definitely looking forward to.
I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a re-release of Pikmin 3 on there first.
It's a good call, actually. That's a very, very good call. Yeah, that was definitely it was a huge game as well. Yeah, that would make an awful lot of sense to get that out first.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, we've talked about this on the show a number of times, the idea of why there's so many re-releases on the Switch from the Wii U, just simply because if you look at how few players got a chance to actually play some of these wonderful games, it's amazing that they're actually re-released. I know there's some people, some collectors especially, that were big collectors of the Wii U that are a little bit upset with Nintendo that they're doing that. And I'm just looking at it from the fact that there's just a lot of good games that didn't get the audience they deserved because of how Nintendo handled the hardware and the marketing behind that system. And it wasn't the game's fault. And it was just an unfortunate circumstance.
Absolutely. I think it was Wii U. I think it only sold about 12 million units. I think it's the number I've got jammed in my head. But it's not a big audience at all. And Nintendo did go some way to create some great content for the Wii U. I still played the new Mario that came out on Switch, didn't it?
You played Odyssey?
No, I played Odyssey, but there's the
re-release, new Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah. I haven't played that yet. That was hard though. I prefer an easier game nowadays.
Well, let me get to the last question, because you already sort of broke into this a little bit, and you could kind of think a little bit more on this. Last year, Nintendo gave us some interesting surprises, and every time I come up with this, I always mention Labo, because Labo was very unique and different, and so that was very surprising to a lot of people. What kind of surprises do each of you think Nintendo has in store for us this year?
I think so. I always ask this question as well, but I never get a straight answer. But it feels to me that a new Switch, not too different, just a bigger screen. So if you imagine sort of removing the bezel around for there, maybe a slightly more powerful sort of CPU, GPU in there, but keeping generally the same form factor. And obviously you need to use the same Joy-Con. Don't want to have to go and rebuy those again. A bigger, brighter sort of screen, longer battery life. Bang, I'm in.
Yeah, battery life for me would be important. Yeah, I would see it as being a slightly smaller, more handheld version.
Oh, really?
But the issue would be, as you said, the Joy-Cons wouldn't work.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to get new Joy-Cons.
But you could, if you think got like a full screen, a kind of bezel-less sort of screen,
I can see exactly what you mean. Yeah.
would look great. And say just with slightly more power, effectively you can get sort of docked power while you're sort of undocked. A really nice bright OLED screen. That's what I'd like to see.
I feel like a smaller Switch would probably have Joy-Cons that weren't removable.
Oh, right, got it. Yeah. So a proper, just mobile gaming device.
Straight out. That makes sense.
That would work. That would be good. Well, maybe both of those things. Well, if you historically looking at the way Nintendo sort of evolved their hardware, because they're not really a hardware company, that they do come out with a sort of almost a kind of shippable prototype. But if you look at the original Game Boy sort of DS, and then how that sort of evolved. So I can imagine really nice piece of Switch kit with a nice big OLED screen and a longer battery life.
But it'll probably have some sort of name like the new Super Switch U HD.
It's exactly that video chipset, isn't it? So that's continually evolving. So they could maybe then support a docked 4K if they wanted to, maybe. So yes, yeah.
Saul said that was the last question, but we always have a bonus question where it's not really related to the rest of our discussion. Sometimes it's kind of an off-the-wall question. Sometimes just one that we just legitimately have a wondering about. So the bonus question for you this time is this one. It's for Jason. It says, since we've got both of you here with us, Soul would like to know. Which one? You wrote the question. So, which one of you is the better football player between the two?
Got as much as it. Yeah, George is the slightly better football player than I was. In fact, I played for a local team who had the record of being one of the worst teams in the area for many years, losing week on week, kind of 10-12-0, which is a very high score for soccer. Usually it's kind of 3 or 4-0. So yes, I can give that one to George.
It's we definitely football's definitely a big part of the Perkins household. We've got season tickets to Arsenal, who are kind of a big team in London. And I definitely agree. I'm definitely the better football player. I play a lot.
No, let's dispute that then.
Yeah, we don't need to dispute that one.
It's funny. It's funny that I heard Jason refer to it as soccer. And before we started this, because soccer was written down as a like in parentheses in the question. And when I was reading the question out before, my wife's British, and she was like, "Don't call it soccer."
Yeah,
like, if you're talking to British people, don't say the word soccer. I was like, okay.
So I put it in there as as soccer for us Yankees, and he didn't even say that part. So
there's a guy who works for us at Curve, who's based over in San Francisco. He's a big sports fan, and when he came over here, we took him to Arsenal so he could see some proper soccer. So yes, familiar with the parlay of calling it soccer.
Well, I gotta say, I really greatly appreciate, we both very much appreciate you coming back, George, to the show, and also Jason for coming on and taking a little bit of time out of each of your day to celebrate our anniversary episode. And, really, it's been an amazing experience to talk to both of you. I want to give you kind of each a last moment to add anything that you wanted to add. If we missed anything, if you have anything you want to say, maybe we'll start off with Jason. Jason, do you have anything else that you want to mention to any of the listeners or the fans?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on with George on your anniversary podcast. That's been great. Please do invite me back for year 2 podcast.
Definitely.
I'm sure it will continue to podcast to air. So thank you very much for that. I'm sorry if I bored everyone with some of my video game stories. So I've probably been in the video games business too long now. I should be retiring shortly. But I'm glad I can still remember some of the detail, because the years will go by and I won't be able to remember everything. So yeah, we're doing some. If you want to find out more about what I do on my day job, you head over to curvedigital.com. That's where you can sort of find out about our latest releases, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. Doing Discord, actually, I think.
Really nice.
But yeah, if you want to find out more about what I do, then sort of go across there. Always really keen to talk to new developers, help them to sort of break through. Maybe it's a game that Curve Digital can't publish, but happy to sort of guide people and sort of point them in the right direction. Always willing to have a chat. So yeah, do get in contact. And thanks again. Been great.
And I got to say, much to the contrary, I doubt anybody would be bored hearing these wonderful stories from you.
You're too kind.
And George?
Yeah, and again, obviously, thank you for having me back. It means I've done something right, which is always good.
They use you to get to me.
It's true. I was a scapegoat. But yeah, thank you again for having me back. And it's always great to see the podcast doing well and also the Switch doing well.
Yeah,
I think, obviously, if people want to know more about Super 8 Games, they can check out our website and our Twitter. I tend to respond to people personally, so yeah, never be scared to say hi to me. Thank you again.
Well, thank you both, and yes, we definitely will ask you both back on the show as we get a little bit further on and have a little bit more to talk about for the next year going on. And thanks again for your time. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. It's been a pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you. Cheers, guys.